Well, in Sri Lanka, security forces have cleared the main protest camp in the capital, Colombo. It was the base of anti-government protests for over 3 months. The overnight raid came just hours before demonstrators were due to leave voluntarily. They are likely to be angered by the swearing in of new Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena. He's a close ally of ousted President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was forced to leave office amid public rage about Sri Lanka's severe economic crisis. Well, our South Asia Bureau Chief Amrita Cheema is in Colombo covering events there for us. She was outside the presidential palace earlier where that camp was cleared. I asked her for more details about the raid.
Anthony, we had a very dramatic night here in the heart of Colombo. I'm standing in front of the Presidential Secretariat where I've been reporting for the past week, and this was the hub of protests. In fact, it was the last bastion of protests inside a government property. Protesters had gone in the entrance of this building, and they were holed up there and were protesting. But then, in the dark night and late at night, suddenly we had hundreds of soldiers and police commandos swarm around this area. There was armoured personnel carriers deployed there. Then soldiers came in here, and what they did was they immediately cleared up these protests there, moved the people out, and then this is the situation that we have now. Barricades have been set up, police officers and the army have been deployed. On the other side of the barricades is the largest protest camp, the Gotabaya camp. That's also been cleared. Apparently, at least the media says, some dozens of people were injured, at least 9 people were arrested and detained. And some people who resisted arrest were roughed up. In fact, even journalists were roughed up. One of our colleagues from the BBC was also hit. Some of the injured are now in hospital. We're also hearing some reports that a few of the protesters are still stranded in the camp below. In this secretariat, yesterday we showed you signs like "Ranil, go home," and people with Sri Lankan flags, and the atmosphere was quite relaxed. But all that has gone. No flags here, no people here. We just spoke to a couple of activists who were here, and they say that some protesters are stranded behind at the camp, and they were trying to get food to them. But these men here said, no way, you're not allowed to go through, so they just had to back off.
So after all of that action you've described, Amrita, the calm, is this a temporary calm, or is this the new government back in full control of the situation?
Well, looking at these scenes, Anthony, it looks like the government is in control. As for calm, well, we didn't see any outrage on the streets of Sri Lanka, or at least in the capital, Colombo, this week. Last week, we saw extraordinary scenes here when there were hundreds and thousands of people protesting. But this week, it's been relatively subdued, the protests. But whether this will last remains to be seen, because I think protesters will see this hardline action by the government perhaps as provocative, and that may force them to come out on the streets again. Now, the Sri Lankan Bar Association was outraged by what happened in the early hours of the morning. They condemned the disproportionate use of force, which they said, against peaceful protesters, describing it as despicable. They tried to mediate, but in fact 2 of their lawyers were arrested. That's what they say. And then the Human Rights Commission was also here trying to negotiate, mediate with the army and saying, let these people go, because there were reports, as you mentioned, that they were voluntarily going to leave this evening. But as we saw, the government chose to take a hardline action against them.
Amrita, quickly before we go, what is the new president's plan to ease Sri Lanka's economic crisis?
What he's done, Anthony, firstly, is he's sworn in an interim cabinet. He's also appointed a new prime minister, as you mentioned, and the prime minister is from the ruling party, so that will anger protesters even more. He is going to soon be starting talks with international donors and lenders like the IMF, and he's due to announce some measures to give relief to the people who've been suffering so much in the past 3 months.
Amrita Cheema in the Sri Lankan capital, Colombo. Thank you so much.